Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
Podcast for parents and families everywhere.
whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students. You want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education where you'll get a great return on every dollar that you spend. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I'm Anika Madden, and I'm a parent. It is Thursday, November 29th, and welcome to episode number 44. Should I take the ACT or the SAT? In this week's news, we're concluding our review on the article, The Harvard Admission Trial Puts the School's Dirty Secrets on Display. And we are in chapter 44 of 171 answers, and we're talking about how to know if the ACT or the SAT test is better for your child to take. And this week's question is from a dad who wants to know why MIT is so much more expensive than Georgia Tech. And Mark interviews Brendan Williams, Director of Knowledge for UASpire, a nonprofit organization that helps students find an affordable path to college. And they're talking about everything you need to know about the FAFSA verification.
Anika, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was completely, totally awesome.
What made it so awesome?
We were back in the ATL, the big old Atlanta, and we were so happy.
Yeah, it's a great place to be. Although I was down in Florida on the beach with my brother and his family overlooking the ocean. It was the best Thanksgiving of my life. How's that?
Oh, I diddle that.
So listeners, you're going to need to cut Anika a little slack here. Though our regular listeners know she's not a night person, but she's so dedicated that she's pulled an all-nighter driving to Pennsylvania and back. So if she starts slurring her speech or saying something crazy, just give her some grace. Give her some grace.
Thank you very much.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark. Last week, we reviewed the article. For those that tuned in, they know it was entitled, The Harvard Admission Trial Puts the School's Dirty Secrets on Display. And this is all about Harvard University's case that has the legal case that's against them right now. And it's brought by a conservative group called Students for Fair Admissions, and it's led by a gentleman named Edward Bloom. And what it's all about is that it's arguing that Harvard disfavors high-achieving Asian Americans. They're alleging that they give a boost to African American, Hispanic, and other traditional beneficiaries of affirmative action. So last week we talked about, we dove into the article and talked about a lot of the highlights around the trial, mostly around the questioning of William Fitzsimmons, who's Harvard's longtime dean of admissions. So, Mark, I know we talked a lot about the weaknesses that we saw in the case, and we wanted to kind of highlight from a different perspective.
Yeah, so there's some things I think people should know as a background. Obviously, Bloom has been a longtime antagonist of affirmative action. He's attempted to bring it down for multiple decades. In the past, attempting to pit Caucasian students against Black or African American students, and he was unsuccessful. So now he's trying to pit Asian American students against Black and Latino students. And so there's a couple of things just by background. One thing I was thinking about, we never talked about, Anika, and what I would call is one of the elephants in the room. And that is, why is it that Chinese students do so well on standardized tests? And so I wanted to bring a couple points up that we didn't discuss last week on that. First of all, Chinese immigrants that come to the United States are already the creme de la creme to get through the immigration process. So they're the professionals. Chinese immigrants are 12 times as likely to have graduated from college than Chinese students who do not immigrate. So there's already a self-selected group that's coming over of highly educated, highly skilled labor. So that's one thing. As I said, 12 times more likely than non-immigrants to graduate from college, and also twice as likely than Americans to have a college degree, the parents. The other thing is that the culture in China and also in a lot of Asian countries is to put an incredible emphasis on standardized testing. So I have to tell you this story, Nick, and this is a true story. This is crazy. But when I was doing boarding school admissions, worked with lots and lots and lots of Chinese students, Korean students, other Asian students. I'm interviewing the student, right? And she's talking to me about her educational background and how much pressure she's under. And this, I kid you not, So she went to these little schools, and there's names for them, and there's 6 students at a time meet. And they're like cram academies, right? Where they like cram all this knowledge into their heads so they can do well on standardized testing. She starts at 11 a.m. in the morning. I'll check this out, 11 a.m., and they go straight to 6 a.m.
Oh, wow.
19 hours with just like bathroom and snack breaks. And she would get like wrapped on the knuckles with a ruler when she would make a mistake. So like that, that's a lot of the culture. Now, not everybody's coming from these cram academies, but the Asian education does put a very, very, very strong emphasis on test scores. So this is just a little bit of background information that I thought, may be helpful to bring to this discussion. But I also want to bring up what I regard as the strongest part of Bloom's case. And that has to do with the case he's making that Asian Americans are discriminated against based on their personality. And so when Sessions administration and Trump approved taking this case up, they got access to Harvard's records. And in looking at the records, they could read some of the comments that were made. And one of the things they noted was that Asian Americans received a lower score in what we call PQs, which is personal qualities overall, than Caucasian Americans, African Americans, Latino Americans. And so I think a legitimate question can be asked: are Asians being stereotyped and seen through the prism of a stereotype of being more passive and not being as outspoken and not as conversational and not making as visible an impact in the classroom environment? And that's one of the reasons that, Fitzsimmons is arguing that they're docked in the admission process. And it may be true, but it may not be true. And so I think a good legitimate question can be asked: are things being seen through a stereotype, or is there something to that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I get it, but I also remember where the article highlights that we got to keep in mind that the Asian American student population at Harvard has grown
Exactly.
over the past few years. So that in itself is kind of a contradiction.
Well, you
right?
know what? That's a good segue. So I do want to make 4 points, and once again, in defense not only of Harvard, because remember, it's not only Harvard. Every school that pretty much does holistic admissions, which is almost every one of your highly selective schools, they are supporting the Harvard position because they do the exact same thing. They just chose to target Harvard because it's such a desirable school because of its prestige.
Right.
And so these are 4 key points I want to make that everybody would say, and you basically made one of them right there, which is colleges actually feel a certain responsibility to prepare people for the world that they're going out into. Right. So they want you to meet people you're going to meet in the real world. And they see that as part of their mission to prepare you for that world. But if they did it in such an absolute way where they'd say, okay, 13% of the country is Black, so we can only have 13% max African-American applicants. 5.6% is Asian, so we can't go more than 5.6% Asian. Then, you could argue that they were completely putting Asians in a box, but they're actually almost 1/4 Asian. They're 23%. 4 times the size of the population. So that is, that's sort of arguing against the fact that they've got Asians so much in a box that they're not allowing for the exceptional Asian applicant. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Any thoughts?
No, I mean, no, I think that's it. I mean, I think that's clear in itself.
So another point, that's one point. Colleges feel responsible to prepare people for the world they're going out into. Another is colleges want what they don't have, right? We've talked about this before. They want what they don't have. So they want applicants from Wyoming and North and South Dakota and Wyoming because they don't have that. They want Native Americans because they don't have that. Because that adds to the intellectual caliber of the institution and allows you to interact with different people, hear different voices from different perspectives, broadens your horizons, increases your critical thinking, and sort of prepares you to transition. And so that is something that every school will hold up as a value. That is going to be quality education. And we happen to be talking about race in this instance, but it applies to everything. So, for example, if a college decides to, and many colleges are doing this, launch a new cybersecurity program, right? Then they're going to look for applicants that are interested in that to fill that program. Colleges look for male students who apply as nursing applicants Okay, or even students that want to go into school counseling is overwhelmingly a female profession. So if you're a male applicant, they want that, which for balance. But if you're a female applicant and you're applying to engineering, that's an advantage because they want what they don't have. And that's just seen as being balanced, and that's seen as strengthening the institution, and that's seen as benefiting everybody. So, Anika, so colleges want what they don't have. And I'm going to say something, and I know this is going to seem stereotypical, and on some level it is, but I do base this on on experience. And there is a higher percentage, an inordinate number compared to the population at large of Asian students that can portray a sort of similar pattern. Oftentimes it's like this, and let me just repeat over and over, this is not everybody, but it is a higher percentage than the applicant pool in general. So a lot of the Asian American students, they want to major in engineering or medicine. They make that clear. Those are the majors they want to come in. Their extracurricular tends to be a musical instrument, less involved in sports. And in general, I do believe from my experience, there is some truth to being less outgoing, less sociable, and not always speaking up in class. Now, obviously, there's lots of exceptions. But my point is this. Colleges want what they don't have. So if they see a lot of applicants that fit the same profile, want to major and be a doctor, engineering, same sports, same extracurricular, similar personality type, the bar is going to be higher for them because they're going to feel like we already have enough students that sort of fit that profile. Now, I know I'm probably not being politically correct by saying this, but I don't think we've ever been politically correct. I'm just trying to be honest. Any thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is.
I thought you were going to say, I'm not touching that one with the 10-foot pole.
And I didn't notice.
So you all can send all those darts and arrows at me, all the hate mail. It can be directed at me. So another point I think that's important for this, and this is really important, and this is hard for a lot of people to understand because we are the land of the individual, right? But colleges they think about what's best for the entire class, not who individually has the strongest qualifications. And because it's all about the team, it's about the entire class. And the way I like to use, Anika, let's say you're trying to form a basketball team, all right? And let's say your fourth best player on the team is a center. But let's say your first and second and third best team are also centers. Well, you know what? You don't need another center. You need some point guards, and you need some shooting guards, and you need some power forwards because that's going to make the team better. And for you non-sports people, let's try the orchestra. Okay, if you're trying to assemble an orchestra and your sixth most talented musician or seventh they're all violinists, well, you know what? You might actually not select that seventh violinist over someone else you may need, like a bassoonist or a violist or a harpist. I'm not a musical person, so I don't know. But does that make any sense? Because you're thinking about what you're making. You want to make the best music. You want to run the best plays. So you need multiple people at multiple positions. And that's how colleges think. And that goes so much against the way Americans think. What are your thoughts?
Well, number one, I'm not an admissions counselor, but I'm sure all of them are nodding their heads like, yeah. But from a parent perspective, I think what I'm taking away from this is that we've got to go into it. I mean, we already talked about the sources where you can go in and see what the profile is like of the student that's accepted into the university or the school. So we'll know what our competitive edge is in terms of being more of our chances, I guess. So that's what I'm trying to.
But what do you think about the point I'm making that it's about the team? And you remember how we've said before, college admissions is like a puzzle, right? You want to be your own unique piece of that puzzle. And so if your piece is one that
I totally get it.
there's 20 or 30 other pieces like that, that doesn't make you stand out because, I just wanted to see if that was making sense.
Right.
And then.
Oh, no. That's perfect sense. And that's where that's where our students, again, being the mom and taking this in as a mom, that's where our kids have to understand the dynamics around the admissions process where they can't get all caught up in, I didn't get into this place because of whatever, XYZ. You got to understand the science that goes behind it. So I think this is for the student right now.
Yeah, the last point I would make would be that for colleges that do holistic admissions, they vehemently, vociferously, passionately do not believe that test scores, grades, and curriculum alone define value. They just don't. So, especially in schools that are more residential, I think their process is more akin to, like, if you think of a hiring decision in a company, you're looking at a lot of things, right? You're looking at how well do you get along with people? What's your personality and how will it fit in with the rest of the people we already have? Uh, how likable are you? What are your recommendations say about you? What are your interests? So let's say, let's use a company. Let's say you got a company, the Anika Madden Incorporated company. What do we want to make it? Was that going to be a marketing company? Sure. All right. So you're trying to hire people, right? And let's say someone applies and they, in their application, they say they've got a black belt in karate and they love to teach other people karate. Maybe like, you know what? I think you can add something to what we have because maybe we can, have little sessions where you can teach everybody karate. I know that may sound corny, but the point is there's so many different things besides your test scores and your grades that schools know will determine who makes the best applicant to a particular school. And this whole argument is based on the premise that you can tell who has more value off of test scores and grades. And that is something that you will get aggressive pushback from admissions. So those are my thoughts, but I do want to kind of close with something on the subject, Anika, and then see if you have any final thoughts. So I am sympathetic to this fact that there are some extraordinary Asian American applicants out there that do get turned away because of the fact that schools want what they don't have. And if they feel like, if we have 4 times as many of you as the population exists already, I'm not saying we won't take more because some of you are so extraordinary. We have to take you, but the bar is going to be higher for you. And it's interesting because I knew we were recording this tonight, right? And I got a call from a friend of mine who is an extraordinary person, Chinese American. I'm not going to give her full name because I didn't ask her if I could share her name on the podcast, but I'll just go with her last name, Miss Wu. And she was exceptional, and she's one of these ones. She got into Stanford, so she actually did very well in the college admissions process. But I actually asked her opinion. I said, what do you think about the Harvard case? And we talked about all of these things. And she was like, Mark, part of me is torn because it is harder in some ways for Asian Americans to get into elite schools. But then she said this. She said, I do not want them to be victorious if it's going to lead to less diversity on campuses, because my experience of having exposure to all kinds of diversity was invaluable to me. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we got to talking about the stereotype about engineering and medicine and playing the same instrument and same extracurriculars and not speaking up. She just laughed because she said all of that. There's truth to that. Like, she can understand how schools don't want too many of the same type of kid. And so, it's just one person, but that conversation happened today and we talked about it. And I thought it was interesting that it's not fair to conclude that all Asian Americans want to see Asian Americans win this lawsuit, because a lot of them are aware that they're being used as a pawn and being exploited. So those are my thoughts. Any final thoughts before we transition?
And that is going to be my final thought, is that I remember the personal agenda behind this case. You got to understand the context of the person that brought this forward. Admissions is such a broad, overarching thing. And it's just that, here's this guy who has a history, a track record of trying to pit one race against the other. And I just keep going back to that. And again, I don't want to repeat what we said last week, but again, the points that Fitzsimmons made throughout the trial were phenomenal. They made sense, point blank. They made sense. So again, to me, it's just another little evil plot. Well, honestly, that's just me.
I'm going to say one more thing, Anika. Colleges that do holistic admission, they are so convinced that their institutions are better at preparing people for the world they're going out into and developing critical thinkers by being exposed to diversity, that if this case is overturned, I can assure you they will come up with another creative way of attracting that diversity, because they believe it's that essential to their core mission of educating people with excellence.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
All right, friends, we're in chapter 44, not 4, 44. Definitely not 4. We're in chapter 44. And for those of you who are first-time listeners, I wrote a book called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And basically what I did was I took the most frequently asked questions I get as a college coach, and I turned each question into its own chapter. And we go chapter by chapter through that book as part of our podcast. And so the question I get asked a lot is how do I know whether to take the ACT or the SAT? And so that's what we're taking on today. And I thought what we would start with, Anika, is some of the common mistakes people make in trying to discern how to take whether they should take the SAT or the ACT. And what do you think one or two of the flaws would be, or the mistakes would be in people trying to decide? What do you think? Which test is best for them?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take it back to my heyday of just not knowing, not understanding not having exposure to both of them equally, and being able to discern from that. Because if I don't take both tests, and I don't take it in which what the chapter actually covers is in a real test like conditions, is that they don't go through the actual process of taking the test to really understand if it is going to be for them or not. So just to not make the assumption, oh, I heard that it's this, so I probably won't like it, and I might just want to try it this way. And then halfway in course, you're flip-flopping between the two. I want to say that's probably the biggest one.
Well, there's a few. So you kind of touched on a couple of them indirectly. So one of them, and we sort of touched on this last week when we saw certain areas of the country are dominated by one test over the other, right? The Midwest is ACT territory. The coast tend to be SAT territory. So sometimes people just grow up only hearing about one test, so they assume that's the better test. So that would be one thing. Or you're assuming that colleges like one test more than the other. That tends to be more, I hear that a lot more about the SAT, probably because a lot of people are looking at these elite East Coast schools. So that's one thing. Another thing, a mistake people make, and I was very weary of this, Anika, in episode 28, 29, and I think it was, I forget which one. It was a few episodes ago, maybe 41. We really went into detail on the ACT versus the SAT. And one of the mistakes people make is they learn verbally or through writing how the tests are different. They're like, oh, this test is me, right? So they'll say, and sometimes they're right, but it's just risky. So for example, let's give an example. The ACT is 25% of the math is geometry, almost 25%, where for the SAT, it's 1/16 of the math is geometry. So people hear one thing and say, oh, I know right now that I'm not good at geometry, so the SAT is for me, but they don't look at things holistically. So they just learn a little factoid here or there, and then they jump to the conclusion. That would be another is rumor, myth, like, oh, people, this race of people do better on this test or that test, or, people from our school do better on this test. And, those type of things are out there. And sometimes that even comes from counselors, like our kids tend to do better on the SAT. And it's so individual. So those are not the ways we recommend to take the test. You want to comment on what we do recommend, Anika?
Well, only because I'm knee deep in it with this NAIA. And that's number one, taking online tests, again, in test-like conditions, and working with a tutor. Like that, oh my God, invaluable, folks. I'm telling you, get with the professional so they can help you work through that.
So I want to add something to your point, Anika, about online testing. And it's true that there are fantastic tests online, and you don't have to compare an essay to an ACT by going and taking an official test. Some people do that, but in general, I usually recommend you don't do that, because some schools ask how many tests you've actually taken. And also, when you're ready to take the test, by the time you sign up for it and the date comes along, you can lose 6 to 8 weeks. So what you can do is you can go online and get fantastic actual official tests that have been used. But I don't want people taking them on their computer. And why do you think I say that?
Is that the official record that's being taken?
No, it's not this official record. It's just that when you actually take the test, you're not going to take it on a computer. You're going to take it on
right,
paper,
true.
right? So I want you to simulate the real test-like conditions, which
Yeah.
is something you mentioned. That you mentioned simulating test-like conditions,
Right.
but part of that means use a really good online test. And I'm in our recommended resource section later today, Anika. I'm going to give a real good source for people to get great online tests. I'll do it for the ACT this week, and I'll do it for the SAT next week.
Okay.
So yeah, so go online, get a great test, print it out, take it on paper. And when you said simulate real conditions, you want to elaborate on that?
Well, actually, I'm thinking more in terms of the timing of it, because I know that was
Exactly.
Naya's issue with the ACT. She's like, "Oh my God, it's so long." So don't stop and start. Like, don't start Saturday and decide you're gonna finish up on Sunday. Actually, sit through the actual course of the test.
Yes, and parents can be great proctors, but don't let your kids say, "Oh, I just need another minute to finish." No, when your time is up, your time is up, because you're not getting an extra. If you're not getting 5 seconds more in the real test, so honor the conditions, simulate real test-like conditions. Number 2 pencil, read the instructions, all of that. Now, once you've done an ACT and an SAT, compare the actual scores. There's fantastic score comparison charts out there. Prep Scholar's got a very good one. Appleroot's got a very good one. Lots of places have very good ones, right? Compare your scores. Now, let's say, I'll ask you a question. So let's say somebody likes the ACT more than the SAT, Anika, but then when they compare their scores, they actually did better on the SAT. Should they go with the one they like more or the one they did better on?
Ooh, that's a question I highlighted for you. And I'm gonna tell you why I highlighted it, because Nate is talking about this like, and I'm like, "Quit, you like it, but did you do well on it?" I mean, life isn't always likable, right? So
you're right, Naya's wrong. Right? So here's the principle: you compare your scores and you go with the one you did better on. Now, 80% of the time, people are going to do the same. When you're in that 80% group who does the same, then you go to likability. Which one did you like the most? And the reason for that is because you're going to be immersed in this material a lot. And so it's going to require motivation. So likability is going to help motivation. And people, from my experience, at least 80 and maybe closer to 85% of people have a preference. They do tend to like one test more than the other. So likability is the tiebreaker. But sometimes I see real variation in Nico. Like, so one of the students I'm working with this year, he has a 780 on the math, on his math SAT. And he has a 25 on the math section of the ACT. Now, that's not even close to being in the same league. So he is definitely an SAT person. So in summary, don't go by folklore. Don't go by wise tales. Don't go by, I've heard people like this test more. Don't go by reading how the tests are different and saying, "Oh, I know myself and I'm going to be better based on how I've learned that." Don't even go by our podcast 28 and 29, and I think it was 41, where we go in detail on the differences. Use that information as valuable information, but we want you to actually take a test, compare, go with the one you're better at. And if you're like most people and your tests are the same, then go with the one that you like the most. Now, there's one exception that I will make to taking an actual test. When students have taken a PSAT, an official PSAT for the National Merit, and we did a whole episode on that, in the 11th grade, that is such a good predictor of their SAT score that I'm comfortable with people comparing their PSAT official 11th grade. Now, some schools administer 9th and 10th. That doesn't count. If you're using it in 9th or 10th, that doesn't count. If you use your official 11th grade PSAT, I'm okay with people using that as a proxy for how they'll do on their SAT and then just taking the ACT and comparing. That's the only exception. What do you think?
You know what? I'm gonna tell you what I honestly think. What my thought is, like, left field right now, is that I really think that folks need to get this book, and I'm so serious, Mark, because in just that last 10 seconds, I started getting a little bit overwhelmed in everything. And it's so helpful to bring it back to an outline and a focus. And it's the holidays, y'all. Listen, excellent holiday gift time, right? Mark, I'm doing the shameless plug. I don't care, because this is how critical it is. I'm serious, especially for us as a parent, because it's a lot that we have to monitor. It's a lot that we have to encourage our kids with. And it's just a lot. So I highly, highly recommend that y'all get this guide, because it's worth every penny of it. And it's not a lot of pennies either, Mark. So thank you for thank you for pricing it the way that you did.
Well, it's $6.99.
Sorry, I didn't mean to digress, but I had to at that moment.
No,
I just felt that coming off.
It is interesting because almost, half the book sales happen in November and December.
Right.
People buying Christmas gifts. So it does make a good Christmas gift. You can just get it at 171answers.com. It is on Amazon, but Amazon takes all your money. So I would love it if you could get it on 171answers.com if people are going to get the book. But most importantly, we just want you guys to not make the mistakes I see so many people make, which is they go through this whole process. And then, Anika, they second guess themselves. They keep going back and forth. ACT, I don't like my score. I jumped to the ACT. Then they jump to the SAT. And they're remember teeter-totters? You teeter-totters on the playgrounds? That's how they are. They keep going back and forth from the ACT to the SAT. So once you've gone through that process, stick to it.
That's right.
Thanks, Anika. That was kind of you, by the way. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Mark, we got another great dad this week, and this is Mr. Dave in Georgia. And his question is, why is it that MIT is so much more expensive than Georgia Tech?
So this was actually a great question that Dave sent us. And Dave was actually asking because he's got a very bright child who he's interested in sending to MIT or Georgia Tech. And he's looking at the differences, and he's like, why these two schools that are arguably top 5 schools in the country when it comes to engineering and computer science, right? And so he's asking, why is MIT around $75,000 if you count full cost of attendance, and Georgia Tech's about $45,000 out of state and even less in state? Why would a school be $30,000 more? So there are really 4 reasons for this. And answer one is that MIT is a public school, so it receives money from the state government, state appropriation. So you're already starting with funding that the private school doesn't have, so that can offset your costs. So the state funding, and you get more federal money as well, being a public institution. So that is reason number 1. Second reason is class size. So, Anika, 38% of students at Georgia Tech are in classes of 19 or smaller. Guess what percentage of students at MIT are in classes of 19 or smaller? Take a guess.
0.
0? Why would MIT cost more? See, this is that sleep. This is that all-nighter we talked about. You've been doing great. It finally showed up. No, because MIT costs more.
Wait.
Because
I'm thinking
MIT costs more. MIT costs more. So if a school costs more, would you think that they would have smaller classes or larger classes?
Yep, sleep deprivation. You're right. I got it.
So I'll tell you the answer. That's okay. You've been doing great. I mean, to pull an all-nighter, I'd be, who knows how I'd sound. So anyway, so the answer is 69. Not only an all-nighter, you drove to Pennsylvania. But anyway, 69% of students at MIT are in classes. So smaller classes obviously means that, who's paying for this, right? The cost has to be, the cost is passed on more because you have less people bearing the educational cost. So we have more money from the state appropriations, smaller classes at MIT, and then faculty salaries. So there is a difference. Like if you look at the average associate professor at MIT, they make $134,000. The average associate professor at Georgia Tech makes $94,000. So that $40,000 times, umpteen people, that's a lot more money. And who's paying for cost? Cost has to be passed on to somebody. And then there's one more reason, and then I'll get some comments from you, Anika, and that is financial aid. So in general, you'll find this to be true that private institutions, they give a lot more money away so that they can attract people of all socioeconomic backgrounds, and they can just bring in, absolutely the most gifted and talented kids, irrespective of their ability to pay. So when you look at how much financial aid Georgia Tech gives away versus MIT, Georgia Tech gives $12 million away a year, and MIT gives $130 million away.
Ooh.
More than 10 times as much money.
Wow.
So when you add up all that extra money for financial aid, for faculty salaries, for smaller classes, and the fact that MIT's not getting the government money, there's your 30 grand. What are your thoughts, Anika?
I think it all makes sense, and you pay for what you get sometimes. How about that?
Yeah, sometimes you do. But also, public state institutions are amazing, bargain. They really are. And so, but that's why both of those schools are unbelievable schools. I've got multiple kids I'm working with this year that are looking at both of those schools, like multiple kids that will get into those schools. And this is where the whole idea of match and fit comes in, right? Like some people, MIT is worth it. Either they can pay the $75,000 or they qualify for financial aid and it's not going to cost them that much. And some people, they don't want to freeze in Boston. They'd rather be in the, as you call it, the ATL, Georgia Tech downtown. That's why in America, we're fortunate to have 4,000 colleges, 3,000 four-year accredited schools. We're really blessed to have so many higher educations institutions, and there's different strokes for different folks. Remember that show?
That's right.
Am I aging myself? Different
Love
strokes.
that show. What you talking about, Willis?
It's all good. Friends, you're in for a treat, and our interview today is with Mr. Brendan Williams of UASpire, and we're talking about something called FAFSA verification. So between 1/4 to 30% of everyone that submits a FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, is going to have to submit additional documentation that can freak people out called verification. And so it's a two-part interview. We're going to talk about what is verification, why people get verified, and what you do if you get verified. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we're in for a real treat today. We have Brendan Williams, who's the Director of Knowledge at UASpire. Welcome to Your College Bound Kid, Brendan.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, how'd you get the title Director of Knowledge? That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a fairly lofty title. They gave it to me. They were like, "How would you like to be the Director of Knowledge?" My manager's the VP of Knowledge. And so what really happened was the organization realized our expertise was in financial aid, and we needed to devote the resources necessary to make sure to maintain that expertise and continue to develop top-notch materials for the students we work with.
Awesome. So just listeners, briefly, I'll tell you, I was getting some professional development in San Antonio a couple months ago, and the best session I attended the entire weekend was on FAFSA verification, and Brendan was leading it. So afterward, I'm like, Brendan, I got this podcast. You got to be our guest. And so that's how I met Brendan. Really excited about having him today. We're going to talk about everything you need to know really about FAFSA verification. And Brendan, why don't you kick it off by telling us a little bit about your background and then also give us an overview about UASpire and the work that you do.
Absolutely. And I will say, Mark, that not very many people find the verification session to be the most exciting. So some credit to you for sort of digging away some of the more boring topics of the financial aid process and finding the excitement in it.
I'm a geek.
So basically, I've been working for UASpire for a little over 7 years now. And so I started off as a financial aid advisor. And I guess maybe it actually makes sense to more introduce UASpire, and then I'll give sort of a brief overview of my role within the organization.
Yep.
So UASpire is a nonprofit focused exclusively on college affordability. And so we do that in a variety of ways, and we've been around since, I believe it was 1985. So we've been around for quite some time and grown much larger more recently. And so we do have our offices are located in Boston and the Bay Area. And in those locations, we have advisors who work directly with students in a variety of schools in those areas. And so they work side by side with the school counselors and help students throughout the whole financial aid process. In addition, we have advisors who work with post-secondary students a lot via text and provide support for students so hopefully they can get to and through college. Another part of UASpire is our training arm, and that's where I met you, Mark. And so we deliver trainings on all different types of college affordability content and try and make sure that school counselors are up to date and know how to handle different circumstances when working with their students and making sure they're well prepared to provide the appropriate supports for their students. And then lastly, to really try and create overall change, we do have a policy arm that was recently started, and we're pushing. We're talking about different policies and trying to make things friendlier for students and try and remove some of the hurdles. And we recently released a paper with New America called Decoding the Cost of College that actually reviewed and analyzed award letters qualitatively and quantitatively to sort of identify some troubling practices that sort of create some hurdles for students. And so that's UASpire. Personally, so like I said, I've been working for UASpire for 7 years. I started off actually as an advisor, working directly with students in the Boston Public Schools, and I love that. And Mark, I think I started sort of geeking out on things too. I think I was hassling my manager a little bit. Why is it like this? Like, what's going on here? What exactly do we do with this Social Security benefit on the FAFSA? And that sort of morphed into more of a network support role, and then a training role. And then really a content creation, content support, and an overall support role for the entire organization around making sure everyone has the appropriate expertise in the college affordability and financial aid arena so that we can continue to be the experts in college affordability. And so that's how I ended up, I guess, as the Director of Knowledge, which is a very lofty title. And I have to remind people that really that's only focused on college affordability, not everything. I'm not like Wikipedia.
Does anybody come up to you and just quiz you? You're the Director of Knowledge and throw one at you.
Yeah, family and friends tend to do that once they find out what my title is at work.
I have to tell you, and our regular listeners will know this, but every one of our podcasts, we start out with a hot article in the news around college admissions that we like a lot, and we discuss it for about 10 minutes. And so we, about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, we actually picked an article that talked about the research that you and New America did. That exactly that article that which you were just discussing about aid awards, and we'll put that in the show notes for our listeners who want to go back and maybe miss that and want to, because that was fantastic. You guys do your workshop that you do on understanding aid awards is also gold. That's gold. Did you develop that one too?
Yeah, I mean I helped. I mean, I've done a lot with the award letter work we've done over the past couple of years, and I will say that paper was sort of working so closely with the students. When you take a step back and look at practices across the board and see where there can be improvements, it really is eye-opening. And it's really, I mean, everyone's trying to work towards providing more clarity to students. I want to recognize that. I mean, but yeah, that definitely check out that paper. I mean, it took a lot of work, a lot of time, and I think we're really proud of the information we're able to provide.
Yeah, it looks like that's episode 28. It was the one where we really delved into that. So once again, we'll put that in our show notes for those who want to go back and listen. So let's talk about our topic of the day, which we're gonna do a deep dive in. And, it's probably a foreign term to most people. A lot of people are just learning about the FAFSA. But Brendan started out with $1 million question. Why don't you tell our listeners, what is FAFSA verification?
Absolutely. And you're 100% right. Folks, they come in, they fill out the FAFSA, they submit it, and they go, I'm done with the financial aid process, right? Not realizing that verification is a very real part of that whole process. And so the verification is basically, when I talk to students, I like to tell them it's basically the federal government or the institution double checking the information you listed on the FAFSA or your other institutional financial aid forms. And they're trying to make sure that students are getting the financial aid they deserve. And so that's how I like to describe it. I like to keep it fairly simple. And it's just 100% them double checking the info that's there and making sure it's accurate.
Yeah. And one thing, I've heard a lot of people complain, even people where I work, our regular listeners know I work at KIP during the day and then do private coaching in the evening and weekend. And so at KIP, a lot of students are Pell Grant recipients. A lot of students are getting verification requests. And I've, heard a lot of, grumbling about it at times. I can't believe all these letters. But you said something in San Antonio that really jarred me. You talked about how much fraud is occurring because of fabrication. You want to comment on that? Because I think when I heard that, it really put in perspective, wow, I really see why there's a need for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe if you go on there, and there's a federal government website around measuring like the amount of inaccurate Pell payments, and I believe that number for the past year was at 2.2 billion, and so that's quite a sum of money in terms of making sure that the Pell money is going to a place where it can be helpful. And so there absolutely is that's why they started doing verification, is to make sure that, like I said, the money is going to the right place, that students are getting the financial aid they deserve, and it's there to support the students there. So, I mean, Mark, I will say there's like another one thing I wish they would release is sort of like how financial aid packages shifted due to verification, and whether more went up or more went down, or I guess EFCs shifted.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really interesting to see that data, to see, is it shifting EFCs down or up, like what's going on here. And I think they released that info a bunch of years ago, and I haven't seen any other data releases around that.
And what did it say? Do you remember?
I think overall it said that, there's not that many shifts in EFC. A lot of them are staying the same for those that are verified. But that's me pulling on the memory strings there, so don't quote me on that.
I hear you. That's okay. You know what, though, Brent? Why don't you tell our first-time listeners what EFC is? I know it's really easy when we start geeking out on financial stuff to use a lot of terminology that some people may not be familiar with. I think most of our listeners who listen regularly will know, but for those who are first-timers, why don't you tell our listeners?
Absolutely. So it's the expected family contribution. So basically, when filling out the FAFSA, you put all the info in, and it produces this number called the expected family contribution. And that determines Pell eligibility, along with eligibility for some federal student loans. What we like to say at UASpire is it's the minimum amount you will pay for college. So colleges aren't necessarily going to meet that EFC where it is. There's going to be a variety of amounts around different colleges, and so we like to think of it as more as an index number that colleges use to help determine your aid.
Yeah. The way I explain it is it'll kind of show you the maximum amounts of need-based aid that you're eligible for, right? Because there's only around 70 schools in the country that really guarantee to meet a family's full financial need. But there is, of course, merit money, right? So there are people that will get their need met through scholarship money, but you're talking strictly off of the need-based assessment, when you say that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I will just warn folks out there that different schools have different definitions of meeting full need.
Yeah.
So when looking at those colleges, making sure you understand what exactly that means.
Yeah, because rarely is meeting full need what a family considers meaningful need. We've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast. I think our regular listeners know that the majority of the time people are going to be shocked with what the EFC is, and they're rarely shocked because it's so low. They're almost always shocked because it's like they think I can pay that. Really?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about the verification process. And is it something that's initiated by the college itself? Is it initiated by the Department of Education? Like, talk about sort of, the chain of events.
Absolutely. So verification, there are really two types. There's federal verification and institutional verification. And really that differentiation only matters on the side of the college. To the student, it's always going to look it's going to look the same no matter who initiates it. But for the Department of Ed, if they're initiating it, it's going to show up on the student aid report, which is the document that's produced after completing the FAFSA that really just provides a summary of all the info and Pell eligibility, et cetera. And so on there, if selected for verification by the Department of Education, there's going to be an asterisk, and then there's going to be some block text that says, you've been selected for verification. Keep an eye out for requests from colleges for certain information. But even if not selected on the student aid report, it doesn't mean that the student won't be selected by the college for verification. So there are a variety of different policies across different colleges in this country, and some they have different standards for verification. And so there are some colleges that will verify every single student that is admitted to their college, and there are other colleges that take a more calculated approach and have certain standards based on info they're seeing on whether or not they'll select different students to complete the verification process. So I guess to answer the question, it's initiated by both, and so it can be it can happen at different times throughout the process.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Hello, friends. The recommended resource for episode 44, as promised, is a full-length practice test, a 2018-19 version of the ACT that you can download online for free. What I want you to do is go to https://blog.prepscholar.com/complete-official-tests-free-links. And when you put that in your browser, you will have outstanding official free ACT test. And what I want you to do is download it. I want you to take the test as a paper copy, use the score grid on the back, and we'll talk more in other episodes on where you go from here. We'll now return to my interview with Brendan Williams. Yeah, and I'm really glad that you shared the colleges that verify everybody, because, I could see some listener thinking, okay, this sounds like some obscure things that happens 1 out of every 100 times. I don't know if this is going to pertain to me. Having said that, why don't we talk about statistics for FAFSA verification? And any data you have on it that you can share with us, Brendan?
Absolutely. And so I will say there was a few years ago, there was some really good verification data released. More recently, there hasn't been as much. But I can tell you in 2018, the percentage of applications selected for verification was between 25 to 30%. And that's really the sweet spot that we've heard the Department of Ed wants it to fall in for federal verification. And I'll just be very clear, these are federal verification numbers. You can't really get institutional verification numbers because each school is so different. And then just sort of, I'm sure your listeners might be aware of how the FAFSA switched to prior year. What was that, 2 years ago now, Mark?
Yeah, 2016.
It seems like time flies, but they did that switch, which allowed more students and families to initially use the IRS data retrieval tool, and that actually showed a 7% drop in verification numbers. And so they're able to trust the information transferred from the IRS. So that helps sort of lower those verification numbers. And then, unfortunately, in 14-15 and 15-16, there was some organizations that ran some data, and it showed that a larger amount of the verification burden was on lower income students. And this is, it's just another hurdle for those students to overcome. Which is very unfortunate. And then when you take a step back and actually think about it, if federal verification is based on making sure Pell Grants are going to the right place, et cetera, lower income students are the main recipients of Pell Grants. And so it does make sense. It's just unfortunate that that's where the hurdle exists. And because there were some crazy numbers where I think at 1 year, over half the students selected for verification were Pell Grant recipients. So those numbers can be a little bit jarring to look at, but it is something that definitely all students should be aware of. But especially if you are a school counselor working with some lower income students, definitely keep an eye out for those verification requests coming in.
Brandon, I've heard that 40% of the population is eligible for Pell. Have you seen any figures like that? Like, I can't remember where I heard that, but somewhere I read that 40% of the population qualifies for the Pell Grant.
I don't have any, and I don't remember seeing any figures like that, or I just don't recall them. I probably have seen them somewhere, but yeah, I can't give you an exact quote on that. But I mean, that sounds like it could be fairly accurate.
Yeah, I think so, because I think the last I saw, I think it's if your EFC is under 5328, you're Pell Grant eligible.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the median family income being, I don't know, that is recently 50s, 60s. So, I think sometimes, Pell Grant is low income, but also be moderate income, especially if you have two kids in college.
Absolutely, yeah.
As well. And I think that's one thing. And I just say that because I know we have a lot of listeners that aren't always low income, and I don't want them who haven't necessarily gone through this process yet, and they may actually qualify for a Pell Grant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will throw it out there that no matter what your income is, you can be selected for verification across the board. And then one other thing, I know you mentioned earlier that a lot of folks are when dealing with the verification process, they're tired of it. A lot of school counselors out there, and it's burdensome. And something that I have to always remind myself of is for a lot of the more competitive private schools that are giving out tens of thousands of dollars in scholarships for that institutional verification process. When you think about they're giving someone $50,000 in financial aid, it makes sense that they want to double check that info and make sure that it's accurate and make sure that their endowments and the dollars they're spending on students are going to the right students. And so I like to sort of, I guess, take a step back and look at it from that perspective to make sure that I'm sort of understanding everyone who's participating in this process.
Yeah, and I never shared this with you, Brendan, but both of my daughters, I have a 22-year-old who graduated from Davidson College. I have an about to be 20-year-old who's sophomore at Valdosta State. Both of them have received a verification letter one time. So I can, I know what this is like as a parent, as well, as a counselor. So yeah. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say absolutely. I mean, it's from all sides. It can be a frustrating process.
Well, but I support the money going to the people that really deserve it, right? I support that. And so I think that's important for us. None of us should want fraud in the system. Listening family, if you enjoyed part 1 of my interview with Brendan Williams on what is FAFSA verification, then I think you're going to love part 2 even more. In part 2, we're going to talk about the different things that trigger verification, that trigger the Department of Education sending you a FAFSA verification request. And we're also going to talk about what to do if you get a verification request. And then we're going to talk about what happens if you ignore your verification request. So we hope you'll tune in and listen.
Next week in the news, how gender influences college admissions. And we'll be in chapter 45, 171 answers. And Mark is reviewing a question he gets all the time about how many times your child should take the SAT or the ACT. And next week's question comes from a student who wants to know if they should apply to a university through the common application or if they should apply through the priority application that is sent by the school. And Mark wraps it up with Mr. Brendan Williams on everything you need to know about the FAFSA verification. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send it to someone you know who could really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. Marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And Your College Bound Kid is produced by Esteban Sartho. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you would like to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text at area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on each show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.